Alright, Vermont history students, hi. Unit 6, and we have reached the halfway point of the semester, and I'll try to keep this one short and brief. Just pausing at the halfway point, I will say that I'm not sure that it has turned out the way that I thought it would. I've put a huge amount of work, at least it seems like it, into this course. Thought I would have more sort of feedback about what works and doesn't work at this point. Thought I might have received a few more papers than I had up to this point, also just wish that I knew you better. I really do. But I do appreciate the interaction that I've had so far, people who have posted on the discussion board, the more of that, the better. So yeah, this is a brief but the crucial turning point in the whole course, which is the rise of summer tourism. And it's like, maybe you get the uphill downhill thing, you know, that it still exists today, but it's not until summer tourism kicks in the 1890s that contemporary modern Vermont's identity really begins to mature. And so what happens is that it makes sense in the Gilded Age, all the way before this, that downhillers want modernity and progress and industry and development, and uphillers like tradition. It's more complicated than that. But what happens is that it turns out that summer tourism becomes an enormously important industry in Vermont, the second largest industry by the 1890s after dairying. And that's a really weird industry. It's hard for downhillers to wrap their brains around summer tourism, because what used to be the worst thing about Vermont, its backwardness, now becomes its greatest asset. And what's even stranger about that, of course, is that downhillers think what they want to do is take summer tourism and use it as any other industry, copper or wool, and use it as a means to make the state modern. But of course, there's a law of diminishing returns when it comes to using summer tourism as a means to modernize the state, because you run the risk of destroying the very thing that you are selling. You run the risk of destroying this wonderful asset you have, which is Vermont's backwardness. Okay? So, there's 4 sections to this unit, and the crucial thing that for you to know is that I'm working on a book, and it's based on a really weird story, and the weird story is introduced today in this class. The first section of this unit is about the formulation of a plan to reverse rural Vermont's decline. In 1888, the state legislature created a new position, which was Commissioner of Agriculture, and that position was given the responsibility for gathering information, statistics, and then making proposals on what could be done to reverse rural Vermont's decline. Of course, as you know, it wasn't maybe in decline, it was perfectly stable and fine, but that's how they saw it. So what happens is that a guy named Alonzo Valentine, who was a Civil War officer, a veteran, who ran a knitting mill in Bennington, he made underwear, was put in the position of being the Commissioner of Agriculture. And he sent out circulars, he called them, pieces of paper, forms, in order to gather an enormous amount of information about the statistics about what was going on in rural Vermont. This was in the spring and summer of 1889. And he sent out these forms all around the state, and none of them came back because most people weren't interested at all in doing the work, in supplying Valentine with this information. He didn't even give them postage to send them back. But in the summer of 1889, Valentine began to publicize a plan he had, that what he wanted to do was revitalize rural Vermont by importing a large number of Scandinavian farmers, Swedes. Valentine said Valentine had business connections out west. He traveled out west. He'd always been impressed by the Swedes. He was also, like many people in his era, anti-Catholic, and he didn't like the fact that Irish and French Canadian people were replacing the departing Yankees. So importing Swedes somehow made sense to him. How many Swedes? What would Vermont look like if, say, 20,000 Swedes moved to rural Vermont? We don't know. But this was his plan. And this story has been told in brief by many historians as an example of a bunch of things. The desperation of downhillers in the era, anti-Catholicism, a lack of appreciation that tourism was on the way. But no one had ever actually done a lot of research on it, and it is a really important, fundamentally cool story that I'm going to write a book about. What happened was that the program was enormously controversial when it came out. A lot of people said, that's really stupid. Why would you want to import Swedes? Why not give the land to Vermont, to Yankees, to Vermont natives who are having trouble trying to, finding farms themselves? But when he sent out circulars after he announced the Swedish recruitment scheme, the circulars came back because people were talking so much and there's so much controversy about the program. Plus, because it's such a stupid idea or weird idea, newspapers all around the country covered it or told about it. Cincinnati, San Francisco, there were reports. I have New Zealand, a newspaper covered it. There was reports that people from India, were writing and asking about cheap Vermont farms. The message got out. Vermont wants to replace departed Yankees with Swedes because farms can be had really, really, really cheap. Now, to frame that, the second section of the unit is about the industrial history of Vermont in the Gilded Age. One of you mentioned that's what really interested you. I had a lot of trouble writing this section, though it's something that in class I could go on and on and on about. But to be brief about it, Vermont is going to be imagined and sold as this idealistic, rural, pastoral, beautiful vision to tourists in the future. But in fact, in the Gilded Age, Vermont went through all the same disconnections and troubles and controversies and conflicts that the rest of the country did. There's granite in Barre and in Hardwick, and there's marble in Rutland, and that's an important story, the Vermont Marble Company. I tried to tell it in brief there, but the Knights of Labor, a national labor organization, organized in the Vermont Marble Company in 1886. The Vermont Marble Company was owned by a guy named Redfield Proctor, who was so powerful that when the workers voted and took over politics in the town, he went to the state legislature and had Rutland cut into 3 parts, isolating the workers in their own little town and allowing him to live in the northern part of town in a new town that he humbly named after himself, Proctor, which is still there. There was a big strike in Vershire, a riot when miners in the copper industry didn't get paid, and they rioted. Burlington, of course, and Winooski have their textile mills and their waterfront, and you have child labor and all those things associated with industry, in the Gilded Age, good and bad. But these things will be basically smoothed over or hidden because Vermont's going to be sold as a magical retreat from the modern world. Okay, without going too much further into it. The third section of the unit is on when the Swedes actually arrive, and Valentine succeeded. He had this guy named John Nordgren, who was a Swedish immigrant who lived in Nebraska, came in the fall of '89, traveled around Vermont, a lot of publicity, said Vermont looks great, it looks a lot like Sweden, Swedes will love it here. In December of '89, he went to Sweden. He brought back 55 Swedes, all of them members of the same church in a town called Glava. And there's real 55 Swedes, and he settled them in 3 different towns around the state. The people I'm writing a book about settled in a town called Landgrove, which is in the corner sort of Bennington, Windham, Windsor, and Rutland counties, right there at that corner, near Dorset and Weston there. And they went to work immediately in lumber mills. 55 Swedes is not that many Swedes. And by the end of that summer, 1890, 13 more Swedes had joined them for a total of 68 Swedes. One of the settlements, the Swedish colonies as they were called, in Vershire, broke up immediately, and they all drifted off. The third one was in Wilmington. And in the fall of 1890, in the legislative session, the Swedish program was discontinued. Valentine's position as commissioner was not renewed, and so basically the Swedes were forgotten. But what's cool about it is that Valentine, through his work, had gathered together an enormous amount of information on where the farms were that were available to be sold, where what he called abandoned farms. They weren't abandoned, they were for sale. And this was now information that could be used by the Board of Agriculture to publish pamphlets that would promote summer tourism, people to buy cheap summer homes. In addition to that, it became clear, because of the huge amount of publicity the Swedish colony program had built around the country, that there were all sorts of inquiries from people pouring in asking about summer homes and buying cheap farms. And this had already taken off. In 1890, many more summer homes were sold directly because of the publicity about the Swedish recruitment program than had been in previous years. And Wilmington is a good example. And so the wraparound story I would use in class is this, which is that Wilmington, way down in the southern part of the state, had a body of water that was called Ray's Pond. And the Ray family, R-A-Y, the Ray family, lived on the banks of this for many generations, and it was just the Ray family's pond, Ray's Pond. But in 1890, Wilmington received some Swedes, but what really the downhillers there realized was that the future was in summer tourism. And so as a means of trying to promote summer tourism, they got together and said, well, Ray's Pond doesn't sound very exotic, you know. So what they did was they renamed it Lake Raponda, R-A-P-O-N-D-A, Lake Raponda. And somehow this sounded, I don't know, French or Indian or something. But the idea, of course, being that now what they recognized, that the future wasn't about Swedish farmers, the future was about summer tourism. And so that's the halfway dividing point in the semester, 1890, and then so what happens next week is summer tourism gets huge and downhillers get confused and uphillers get mad at each other, and you'll see it's really a lot of fun and interesting, and then we make our way through the 20th century very quickly. So please send me assessment papers. We have a town meeting that is due. Please just post on the discussion board. Don't bother writing town meeting papers. Posting on the discussion board will suffice, takes that place of that. Write me with any questions you have, and please tell me anything I can do to make the semester better for you. Okay? Alright, cool. Alright.